John's going to talk about securing PTP, and this is great. I appreciate this presentation because the AMWA, among others, had raised an issue to the SMPTE about this and asked them to do something, and SMPTE did. So thank you very much for coming to talk about this.
And well done for scheduling the security talk right at the end of the day.
Oh, no, we got one more.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Thanks, everybody. This is a presentation about the second report that SMPTE has done into security and PTP. I was lucky enough to be the chair of this group for the past year, and we have actually submitted the final version of that report for approval by the technical chairs, and I had actually expected it to be live on SMPTE's website by now. By the time the call for papers came out for VidTrans, I had to make an educated guess we'd have it out. We don't. It is going to be called the ER 1009 2023. That's what you can go and look for. So without, do I get a clicker?
Yep, green button.
Thank you. So this is the outline of the talk. I guess most people in this room know what PTP or Precision Time Protocol is, but I'm going to do a quick level set anyway for the people who don't. We'll talk about what's special about it from an information security perspective, and then talk about some specific threats, how to detect them, contain them, and mitigate them. And this is just going to be a sampling of the main body of the report. We'll close out with highlighting some best practices and some further work that we're thinking of. So, Precision Time Protocol. Let's sort of go over here. Gerard, what time is it? 3:30. We're just about at sea level here. The speed of sound at this level is about 1 millisecond per foot. That's a good rule of thumb. So you should have said, thank you, Siri. So you should have said 3:30 and about 120 milliseconds. That would have been no good for Gene here because he's nearer, so we should have said plus 100 milliseconds for Gene. And that basically is a problem that PTP solves. It corrects for the distance between a clock that's announcing the time and something that wants to consume that time. So here I've got a model. We've got two so-called ordinary clocks in the argo of PTP. We've got a leader and a follower. And those are called ordinary clocks because they have their own timer, which they can adjust according to whatever logic they follow. And I'm mentioning ordinary clocks because we do have other types of clocks inside PTP and inside the reports that I want to talk about. The idea of a follower is it locks onto the leader's clock. And to do that, it needs to gather some data. And so I've got this little playpen here, or sandbox of the data that can be gathered by the follower. What normally happens is that the first thing that happens is that the leader will send a sync message to the follower. And at this point, the follower can get the timestamp that it received that message at, and it may also have the timestamp in that message that the follower was able to inject into the packet. Some followers can do that if they have the right hardware, some can't. The ones that can't send up a follow-up message to say this is the time that I actually meant, and by that time the data at the follower now includes this third timestamp, T3. The follower will then send a delay request message back, which will be received by the leader at T4. Notice that the follower doesn't know what T4 is yet until a message comes back to saying this is when T4 happened. Now the follower has got enough information to do a calculation called the mean path delay, which it takes the average of the differences of those T1, 2, 3, and 4, and calculates the mean path delay. And this is the basic quantity it can put into servos and use that to correct the frequency, and phase, and offset of its clock to that of the leader. Other types of clock that we'll talk about briefly, there's one called a transparent clock, which basically fudges or changes timestamps, adjusts timestamps inside of PTP sync messages to correct for their transit time across a switch. So there are two modes, and these are good and cheap, but a long chain of transparent clocks will actually reduce your accuracy with each network segment. We also have a boundary clock, which is a little bit more robust. It synchronizes a leader using its full upstream-looking follower port, and it then generates its own clock, which it shares out on some of its output or downstream leader ports that other followers can sync from. And this is a good way of dividing up a large PTP network into smaller, more manageable parts while maintaining good accuracy. And these are normally implemented in gateways, routers, or bridges. Okay, just to complete the types of PTP messages that can be sent, announce. This is part of, well, it's used to select the so-called grandmaster. That's the clock that everybody is ultimately syncing from. There's an algorithm called the best master clock algorithm that is used to choose what the best clock is, what the best master clock is. And the announce message is used by all the clocks to say, this is what I can do. This is how good I am. Choose me. We also have management and signaling messages. Management controls the infrastructure and monitors its health, and signaling are some non-time critical messages. And they're not really covered in the report, so I'm going to smooth over those. So typical PTP applications, well, it's anywhere where you need sub-microsecond accuracy at a reasonable cost. One alternative is a network time protocol. Under best case conditions, in other words, on a local area network, you're going to get less than about a millisecond accuracy, an RMS of a millisecond. Just for comparison, I've seen RMS errors of 75 nanoseconds on PTP, so it's a couple of orders of magnitude difference. Applications that use it, high-frequency trading, telecoms, a lot of stuff, including IP-based broadcast infrastructures, which is what we're all interested in. And so this is how, one way in which PTP is critical to IP-based infrastructures. Here's a diagram that I lifted from SMPTE 2110-20. It's the gapped packet read schedule. And basically, these quantities like the TRS, the interval between packets that get pasted onto the wire. Depending on your format, and the example here is 1080p 5997, they have to be pasted onto the network at a very precise 3.7 microseconds gap. You can't do that with NTP. That's why we need PTP in broadcast. It's one of the reasons. There are many others. This is a model architecture that is a diagram that's lifted from the report itself. And I'm going to have to consult my notes on this. It's a composition of a media network. And this isn't a realistic architecture. It's really composed to show various points of interest. The key being there are various network zones. So we have the broadcast data network, and I like to think of this as being the media fabric. This is where your 2110 lives, and on this network travels the PTP messages as well. And so coming in from the top, we've got our global navigation satellite system receivers, feeding it a couple of redundant grandmasters. We've got redundancy here as well. And they generate these GM outputs, grandmaster outputs. That will be followed by a boundary clock, which can provide leadership to downstream boundary clocks. It could also go through a router with a transparent clock that could basically forward these timestamps with a correction through to a follower here. We might plug in local diagnostic equipment, and this router's feeding another follower here, which is another boundary clock that's feeding a leader port into another follower here. This is, like I said, our media plane. Down below, we've got our, I like to think of this as the operations plane. This is where you've got your broadcast configuration systems working. And the key is that some of these broadcast equipment, they're dual homed. They've got a media fabric connection and they've got an operational fabric connection. And that's one source of risk that we cover in the report. Then we've got our enterprise network. Enterprises like to monitor what's going on all over the place. So they'll have scanners, and they'll have data gatherers and asset managers that need to have regular access to what's going on over here, separated by a firewall. I don't see much PTP going on here. And then you actually get to the outside world, the public internet, where they have, this enterprise has got access to subscribers, accounts, they can sell things, they can make money. So the key takeaway here is that you sensibly segment your network, the PTP, the media net fabric here, operations fabric here, some telemetry and enterprise control here, and then a long way away you actually get to the dirty public internet here. So let's talk about PTP, information security, and media production. And ask the question, what makes PTP worthy of special attention and consideration within media production? Let's start off by asking what information security is. And it's formally defined by NIST as the so-called triad, 3 things. It's confidentiality. You can't access secrets unless you're authorized to do so. It's integrity. The email you sent is the email that somebody receives. It hasn't been tampered with en route. And it's availability. And that ensures that information can be accessed by authorized systems and users in a timely manner. And in our industry, those words, timely manner, they carry a lot of weight. They're doing a lot of work for us here. Nobody really cares if your email is 20 milliseconds early or late. If your video stream jitters by that much, then you either don't have a show or you're going to be spending a lot of money to put frame syncs everywhere, or GNSS receivers everywhere. So that's why PTP is of special interest, or requires special treatment within information security. It's really the availability and the integrity that we focus on. Confidentiality does come into it, but we'll get to that at the end of this presentation. But the big ones for us are availability and integrity. So, media networks. The business requirements are fairly easy to state. We need clear and correct pictures and sound. We need accurate conformance with the playout schedule, and that means we need frame-accurate automation systems to be able to control those things. And none of that exists without reliable, accurate timing. Interesting to look at how our attackers are evolving. I think I'm just preaching to the choir here that we all know that we're in the throes of a generational shift, where we're moving from special purpose cabling and hardware-based processing to IP distribution and increasingly software-based processing. The best white paper that I never got to write or present was entitled "Nobody Ever Caught a Virus Over SDI," but IBC said no. It was actually about security. It was a joke in the title. But basically, more IP means there's more to attack. Attacker motives can be ideological, especially if you're a state broadcaster. And if they're ideological, then they're likely to be advanced persistent threats, state actors, very, very sophisticated, very patient, highly skilled, well-funded, professional, and likewise those just after a ransomware hit with financial motivations, they are now paying that they're paying six-figure salaries to people who they can use to either make initial breaches or lurk on networks or actually execute the ransom. So it's a formidable foe that we're up against. And because you don't have a show if you don't have timing, really broad-based damage can be done if somebody can get into your PTP system and attack it. So let's have a look at some specific threats and the good news, how to control against them. This is an innovation in the report. We've gathered together all the information about specific threats into these things that we call threat cards. I'll walk you through one. So we start off with a nickname. This one's called Rogue Leader, and a brief description of what it is. So use the best master clock algorithm to take over control as a leader and then lie about the time. We've got our impact statement here, where the warning triangles indicate whether you're going to get false time, degraded accuracy, denial of service for PTP services, or worst case, your essence is going to get disrupted. Then we have a detailed description and what it is about your system that will make you susceptible. So if you have unused switch ports that have not been disabled, and if you're not using boundary clocks and not setting boundary ports as leader only, those are the things that you shouldn't be doing. So this is pretty clear, actionable guidance, we think. How to detect? So if the Grandmaster ID changes, then that's usually a bit of an alert. If the Grandmaster you're using changes state from active to passive, that's another thing to raise your hackles. And if you see a lot of chatter on the announce messages, that's another thing. We have a detection effectiveness box here, and this basically says how good these are at saying you're in trouble. And in this case, they're all pretty good. And then the final box is what to do about it. So use boundary clocks and use message authentication. We'll see boundary clocks and message authentication a lot in this report, and it's a little bit disappointing that just how to authenticate messages is still a topic of study with IEEE. That's why we probably need a third report once the dust has settled on that. That's the same report card that I just went over, so I'm going to skip over it. There are about 20 of these in the report. I am going to go over one in electronic detail with you here and now. No, I'm not. I'll go over a few, which were pretty interesting. GNSS spoofing. So this comes over the category of tampering and spoofing. And spoof the GNSS. Use a drone to go and hover something near the antenna that people are using and put a bogus radio message into there. That's easy because GNSS is weak, and it's easy to overpower the signal coming from those space vehicles. The detection methods are monitor your signal satellites, monitor your GPS location, detect the space vehicle which should not be present at the current time. So these things are predictable. You know when they are going to be at various places, and compare information from different constellations. So you could use some different constellations there. How to mitigate it? Hide your antenna. Use one that rejects jamming. Use an anti-spoofing receiver, and use a multiband system. So these are other tampering and spoofing threats, sending bad sync messages or masking sync messages. More details on those in the report. Denial of service attacks. We've got about 7 of these. I'll just walk through one of them. This is to denial of service on followers. So it's basically blast the follower with excess traffic to basically overload its parser. I'm not going to read all this to you, but I will talk about the impact. You'll get degraded accuracy and you'll lose your PTP service. And we're back to boundary clocks. Using switches in non-boundary clock mode will do this. If you have a boundary clock between you and the grandmaster, it defeats that problem. How to detect? Look at how many messages you're getting. If there's a burst of them, then you know you've got a problem. And the mitigation coming back to boundary clocks. A delay or a replay attack is where you record messages and then send them again later. And this obviously can give you false time, degraded accuracy. What susceptible attributes do we have? Leaving switch ports open, not deactivating them, not using boundary clock, and running PTP outside of a protected plant. So maybe you accidentally plug a laptop between two networks and now you've made a bridge and you can get bad stuff onto your network, onto your PTP network. Other denial of service threats, you can DOS the leader. You can misconfigure a network to create message loops so that they just spin round and round. You can fail to reject bad messages, and this BMCA, Best Master Clock Algorithm thrashing, is done by causing continuous cycles to prevent clients from actually locking to a leader. So quite a lot of opportunities to deny service. Man in the middle, this is intercept and corrupt the messages. And this, again, the frustration here is that the mitigation is something we don't have because it's not standardized yet. But basically have signatures on messages so that you can prove they come from where they claim to come from and reject the ones that don't pass the signature test. This is a management message attack, changing the leader priority. So you can use a management message to say, hey, you clock that's currently the grandmaster, change your priority down. And so the next time there's an announced session, another clock will be changed. And so you may do that in combination with the rogue leader attack we saw previously. You can mitigate that by requiring proper authorization to actually enable the priority to be changed. You know, the data set here is basically the parameters of the GM. Other management message attacks, you can elevate privileges to promote a follower to an ordinary clock. You can misconfigure the QoS. This is actually interesting. On your network, on your media fabric, PTP should have the highest priority. If it doesn't, then you're not going to get good time, and your PTP might be squeezed out by your high bandwidth media signals. So don't do that. Misconfigure switches is probably not so much an attack as a don't do that kind of piece of advice. And then remember that I mentioned that on that architecture diagram, some of the devices are dual ported. They're connected to both the operational network and also to the media fabric. And that's this media node problem where if you can get in from the control port, then you can maybe do bad stuff to the media fabric. Okay, that's a quick tour of the specific threats. There are about 20 in the report. There are some other vulnerabilities which fall under the category of bad behavior or misconfiguration. I mentioned network bridging before, where if you plug in a Wi-Fi enabled laptop, then you've connected your media fabric to Starbucks, and that's bad. Device control misuse. A lot of devices have connections to both data and control, and again, that's kind of a repeat of the media node thing. So again, try not to do that. This is a new one. This wasn't in our previous report. And this is, I said we'd touch on confidentiality towards the end of this presentation. PTP, as it's defined, the protocol, has got a lot of reserved fields in its packet definition. PTP, as we've seen, is given high priority, it's trusted, it goes through firewalls. You need it for your show, so you're going to let it go everywhere. So somebody who's smart and has access to your network and bad, they could smuggle quite a lot of interesting stuff through those reserved fields if they could access to them. Things like secrets, SSH keys or certificates or private keys. So this is a new threat that we added to the to this report. As of yet, we don't have mitigations or detection methods. We'll probably work on those for the next report. Okay, I'm going to finish with some best current practices, which is basic hygiene from an information security point of view. Use a lot of authentication, especially for your sync generators. I've harped on about using boundary clock mode at least 7 times. Maybe that's enough to get in. Isolate your PTP segments and control which clocks can be the grandmaster. Protect your antennae against jamming and spoofing. And in multi-site deployments, don't put your PTP across the dirty internet. Use a separate GM or grandmaster at each site to block PTP crossing from between those sites, and employ a PTP monitoring system which can listen for all those things that we said would make good detections and good alert triggers to keep your system up and running. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, John, we appreciate not just you coming to present this, but we also appreciate the SMPTE being responsive about the security issues here.